Okay, we're going to continue with the review packet that we started the other week, but what we're going to do is we're going to do it through these videos for right now. The first thing I want to touch on with the review packet is basically what we've done so far. So the first thing we did was adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. So this is the first thing that should be in your review packet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 1 here. Of course, my board's not working, so give me a second. Let's try this now. All right, so this is the first thing we talked about, adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. Talked about adding the same signs and different signs. Then the second thing we talked about is multiplying and dividing positive and negative numbers. Multiplying with same signs, different signs. Multiplying a strand of numbers, how we determine if it's positive or negative, based on the number of signs, negative signs it has, whether it's an even number or an odd number. And then from there, I gave you 10 problems adding and subtracting, and then I gave you 10 problems with multiplying and dividing. Okay? From there, we went to percents and proportions. So that's going to be the third major thing. Gave you some examples. Talked about is over up, percent over 100. So that leads us up to where we're going to start today. So our next section that we're going to talk about is adding and subtracting fractions. So if you will label this number 4, please, or this will be the fourth thing. And I'm going to put all this in Google Classroom so that you'll be able to see everything you should have. All right, when adding and subtracting fractions, just like positive and negative numbers, adding and subtracting fractions and multiplying and dividing, for that sake, causes issues with students. So when adding and subtracting fractions, and what I want you to do is just, like other notes, I want you to have this in there. When adding and subtracting fractions, you have to have a common denominator. You always have to have one when adding and subtracting fractions. So let's take the example, 2/3 plus 4/6. All right, so we have that example here. Common denominator, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite it. So it's 2/3 plus 4/6, so it's like this instead of kind of sideways. Common denominator between 3 and 6, what's the common denominator? That both 3 and 6 can multiply by another number to get it, or what number can be divided by both 3 and 6. And if you do the math, you'll figure out that it's 6. 6 can be divided by 6. 6 can be divided by 3. 3 times 2 is 6. So I'm going to apply this numerator, 2 times 2, to get 4. 6 times 1 is 6. So I'm going to multiply 4 times 1 on the numerator. So that now gives me 4/6 plus 4/6. When adding and subtracting fractions, you only add the numerators. So I'm going to add across the top. I get 8 over 6. The bottom number stays the same. I can simplify that if I want to, or I can wait and simplify it after I make it a mixed number since it's improper. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify it. 8 and 6 can be divided by 2, so 8 divided by 2 is 4. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So I get 4/3, which when I make it mixed gives me 1 and 1/3. All right, next one. 10/12 minus 2/8. All right, this one's subtraction. It works the same way, except we're going to subtract the numerators. First thing we need to do is find the common denominator. So a common denominator for 8 and 12. And if you don't know what the common denominator is, just list the common multiples. 12 times 1 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. 12 times 3 is 36. 48, so on and so forth. We do the same thing for 8. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. 32. So on and so forth. So if I look up here, I see that we have a 24 in common. So that would be my least common multiple, or my new denominator, least common denominator. So I'm going to put a 24 minus, and a 24 for that denominator. 12 times 2 is 24, so I'm going to multiply 10 times 2, which gives you 20. 8 times 3 is 24, so I'm going to multiply 2 times 3 to get 6. Now I subtract just the numerators across the top. 20 minus 6 is 14. I keep the bottom numerator at 24. So 14 over 24, and that can simplify. Divide each of those by 2, which is a common factor, so that gives me 7/12. And again, if you'll copy this down, so that you have these examples. And this is adding and subtracting with fractions. Now, the next logical thing with this would be, okay, what if we're adding and subtracting with mixed numbers? What we're going to do is we're going to convert all mixed numbers to improper fractions. So if you're adding or subtracting with mixed numbers, make them improper and then go through this process. Okay? So let's take this example. We have 4 2/4 minus 5 4/10. Now, when we're taking a mixed number, making it improper, remember I call this the backward C. We multiply and then we add. So I'm going to do 4 times 4 is 16 plus 2 is 18, and that gives me 18 over 4. I'm going to do the same thing over here. 10 times 5, I should say. We multiply, and then we add. 10 times 5 is 50, plus 4 is 54. Put that over 10. So we now have 18/4 minus 54/10. Okay, so we do not have common denominators, so I've got to find a common denominator between 4 and 10. And again, if you're not sure what they are, all you have to do is just list them. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. I think you can look at it and see that it's going to be 20. So my common denominator is going to be 20. 4 times 5 is 20. So I multiply 18 times 5. 18 times 5, do the math, you're going to get 90. 10 times 2 is 20. So let's multiply 54 times 2. 54 times 2 is 108. So we're now subtracting 90/20 minus 108/20. Now you look at this and all of a sudden some of you are going to say, well, you can't subtract 90 minus 108. Yes, you can, because we have already done or worked on adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the signs. This 90 is positive, that 108 is negative. So what do we do if we're adding or subtracting with different signs? Different signs with adding and subtracting is we subtract the two numbers. So if I subtract those two numbers, that gives me 18. Take the sign of the bigger number. The 108 is bigger than 90. So the sign of that, I take the minus sign, which makes it negative. And then I keep my denominator at 20. So I have negative 18/20. And of course, I always want to simplify, so I can divide each of those by 2. So that gives me negative 9/20. And again, if you will, copy this down. Didn't mean to do that. And let's just highlight it. Highlight this example here. So that you have the example of adding and subtracting with mixed numbers. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is multiplying fractions. Multiplying fractions, very simple. First thing we're going to do is convert all mixed numbers into improper fractions. Once we do that, we're going to multiply straight across the numerators and the denominators, and then simplify. We always want to simplify. And we can simplify before we multiply if you like doing that. So let's go through a couple examples. All right? So I have 3/6 times 7/11. I don't have mixed numbers, so I just multiply straight across. If I want to, I can look at the bottom and the top, see if anything simplifies. In this case, it does not. So I multiply straight across the top. 3 times 7 is 21. 6 times 11 is 66. And then I want to look to see if it can simplify. And, well, actually, let me go back to this problem. This part would simplify, and I could have simplified that, so I'm sorry, I should have possibly simplified it, but it doesn't matter. You can simplify it before you multiply or after you multiply. if I look at 21 and 66, I can see that both of those can be divided by 3. So 21 divided by 3 is 7. And then, turn the board off real quick. Alright, so 21 divided by 3 is 7. And then 66 divided by 3 is 22. So we get 7 over 22, which gives us our correct answer. So we have 36 times 7 elevenths. We multiply straight across the top to get 21 over 66. Divide each of those by 3 to get our answer of 7 22nds. Alright? Now let's go do an example with mixed numbers. So we have 2 and 3/8 times 3 and 5/6. We have mixed numbers, so let's go ahead and multiply and convert those to improper. So I do 8 times 2, then add 3. 8 times 2 is 16. Plus 3 gives you 19, so 19 over 8 times 6 times 3 is 18. Plus 5 is 23, so it gives me 23 over 6. And I look across diagonally, I look across the top and bottom to see if there's anything that can be simplified and cannot be simplified. So I go ahead and multiply. You'll notice at the top I have 19 and 23. That's why I like to go ahead and simplify sometimes before you multiply so that you don't have such big numbers. So let's multiply 19 times 23. And when you do that, you get 437. And then multiply across the bottom. 8 times 6 gives you 48, which is now an improper answer. So we want to make that mix. So let's divide 437 over 48. Now, if you use a calculator and you divide 437 and you divide that by 48, that's going to give you a decimal answer. I don't want a decimal answer, I want a mixed number. So I know 48 cannot go into 4, it cannot go into 43, but I know it can go into 437. So, by trial and error, I could see, okay, 48 times 5, does that work? 48 times 10, 48 times 10 is 480. 480, if I compare it, is too big, so I might want to go down. So I'm going to try 48 times 9. 48 times 9, when I multiply it out, gives you 432. So if you compare that to 437, you see that it can go into it 9 times. 9 times 48, as we said, is 432. So I subtract just like you did in elementary school. That gives you a 5. Now, during middle school, we don't use remainders, so we use this to create our mixed number. I drop the 48 down. That is my new denominator. This 9 up here is my whole number. So my answer to this problem is 9 and 5 48ths. All right, so if you'll copy this down. All right, I'll give you a little trick here. When you get to this point right here, if you have a calculator, go ahead and divide it. So take 437 and let's divide it by 48. And you get a decimal value of 9.10416666 on the calculator. I don't want a decimals, so I want a mixed number. But what this does is it gives you the whole number that goes on top. So all I have to do is put that 9 on top, and then I can start working through the problem. You don't even have to worry about those decimals. So if you ever have a big improper fraction and you're not sure what to divide into what, and you have a calculator, go ahead and divide it, and that will at least give you a whole number. That would be the top part. Okay? Now dividing fractions. Dividing fractions is going to be very similar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video, and we're going to start fresh with the second video on dividing fractions.